Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and once again it is time for the Q&A, so let's go ahead and get this started. All right, first question. Run the same two compounds for 12 to 16 weeks or switch to two others at the halfway point. I'm not even 100% sure what you're asking, so I'm gonna work with this from a couple directions. Compounds, I'm assuming you're not talking about anabolics, because that's usually what people would say when they're discussing cycles. I would say no, run the same thing all the way through. But I think you may be talking about training here. All right, let's get terminology correct. I'm going to teach you guys this stuff. There is no such thing as a compound or an isolation movement. These are bodybuilder terms. We don't use these in sports science or strength and conditioning. They're called single joint and multi-joint exercises. I'm going to assume you mean multi-joint exercises here. So I don't really know why you would want to run the same lifts for 12 to 16 weeks. Now, you know that I'm a conjugate coach and I run a conjugate channel. It means either I put people on novice linear programs, which I have free ones, or we do conjugate. We don't think like this in conjugate. On conjugate, we rotate our max lifts every single week. Okay? You may not do the same lift more than once in a 12 or 16 week cycle. Okay. Our speed work usually works in 3-week waves, right? Our supplemental work could be changed weekly. A lot of times we'll do it in 3-week waves. Or if a movement is doing really good and you find it really effective long term, and either you're not regressing on it, you're not getting overuse on it, you could run it for 17 years straight every week. Like the reverse hyper is a perfect example. So when you look at it in that context of the way that I teach, the way that I program, the way that I train, we would never look at it from this perspective. Because we have different timelines for everything that we do, right? We change max lifts every week. We probably change speed work lifts of some variation every 3 weeks. So I don't know, what are we talking about? Supplemental lifts? Accessory work? Sure, you could run the same thing for 16 weeks if you're getting no inflammation or overuse from it and you're still progressing on it a bit. Sure. If you start getting any of those things or you just feel you're not progressing on it, you switch it immediately. I usually run about 3 weeks for most of my clients on a lot of their lifts. About 3 weeks. And then we rotate them, or at least one of them or two of them. All right, next question. Should a person focus more on strict overhead press, slightly less weight, or push press, slightly more weight for upper body gains? Okay, neither one of these are going to necessarily put the most muscle on your upper body. It's an overhead press. There's far more in between in this, and if it's only slightly more weight, you're not doing a push press. Okay, if it's only a little bit more, it's not a push press. You're just using a little bit of leg drive on an overhead press, and there's a place for that for hypertrophy, right? I'm going to say that from a hypertrophic perspective, using a small amount of leg drive on your rep work can have a great deal of merit, which would mean slightly more weight, but that is not a push press. It's just not doing a strict press. A push press is an Olympic lift, supplemental lift. It's technically carries over to your jerk. Okay, the push press is done in Olympic lifting and it uses a lot of leg drive, and it's not going to be slightly more weight. In other words, if your strict press is 200 pounds, you're not going to push press 225, right? You're going to push press 250, 275, possibly close to 300. Depending on how good you are at push pressing. So for upper body gains, I'm going to say it probably doesn't matter a great deal whether you use a small amount of leg drive or you go strict in regards to that. I think and I believe the strict press will carry over better to your benching. But in terms of just general hypertrophy for the upper body, say your delts and things like that, these are probably relatively equal. One of them has a little more eccentric overload, right? But has a little more to recover from. at the end of the day, I think your stimulus to fatigue is going to be pretty similar. I would say you could use either one. Just don't call it, if you use a little bit of leg drive, just kind of call it a press with leg drive, right? Because it's not a true, if you call it a push press, people who really know what a push press is are going to make fun of you because it's not. They're going to come in and say, well, that's not a push press. Again, you have to look it up. Push press is a very specific Olympic lift. And the Olympic lifting community is really bizarre about these things. Right? They're really weird about it. They get really upset if you break any of their traditions. It's almost a religion. And it's quite comical. Like they almost have this religious dogmatic view of their sport and their variations. And you can't deviate ever from anything in technique or their tradition or they get really upset. It's only one right way to do it. So just be aware that if you call it a push press, you're going to catch flack from those people. If you're just using a little leg drive. But either one works. They can have their place. They're relatively interchangeable. It's easier to program the strict press because you don't have leg drive. The leg drive will throw off your ability to program slightly more because you may be slightly inconsistent with it. You can't always track overload as well. Right? And these aren't lifts that you want to take to failure a whole lot. They'll beat you up. So just be aware of that. But I think for hypertrophy purposes, the two are pretty much interchangeable. I don't think one is necessarily better than the other. All right, next question. Do you use much leg drive on the incline bench? Oh man, tricky question based upon the way my knowledge has upgraded. I am starting to wonder if J.M. Blakely is not correct when he says that there is no such thing as leg drive on the bench. It's just being tight. There's no such thing as leg drive. You can want there to be all you want. You can imagine it. You can believe it, but it doesn't seem to match the physics. And again, world-class level bencher in the past, has a PhD in exercise science, full-time coach for decades. He might be right. He says physically and biomechanically it's not possible to have leg drive on the bench. It's just you getting tight. And I've kind of said in the past that you don't need to learn to use leg drive. If you just get tight enough and sink the bar, it happens automatically. And you can't undo it. Which is also kind of funny because all these people who want to remove leg drive, they do certain lifts to try to remove leg drive and all they're doing is removing their tightness. Lifts that I've never liked, by the way. The Larson press, I am not a fan. I know a lot of people love the Larson press, and I've said before, and I'll say it again, I think it's kind of a stupid exercise. There are other alternatives that are much better. I just don't think it brings anything to the table. That might change one day in the future. I might decide, hey, it really does make sense. But to me, it's just benching flat back loosely, higher risk of hurting your shoulders, higher risk of losing your balance, tearing a pec. Just to try to remove leg drive, which may not actually be real. You're just removing tightness. That's why you can't move as much weight. If we come over to the incline bench, I guess the same thing would apply. I get tight and I sink the bar and I drive. But is it really leg drive? I don't know. Whether leg drive exists or not, then I think I use the same amount on the incline that I do the bench. And I think anyone else would too. If you dig in and you're tight, you're going to see the similar type of movement to where your torso pushes forward. Right? But that may not actually be leg. That may just be you getting really tight, and then the whole tightness through your body when you sink the bar in helps you slide back towards the uprights. And it does it on the incline too. You can see it when I do it, when I sink it. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time in part 2.